My name is Tiffany Scurry. I'm the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at Western Digital, a technology company in San Jose. Very happy to be here today. The way that this afternoon session is going to work is we'll have two segments, as you know. There will be a 10-minute presentation followed by some feedback that I'll be able to deliver to the team, and then a 90-second presentation. And then after that, we'll have plenty of time to engage in some Q&A. If there's any questions that you want to ask me about my experiences or the process that you went through, anything you want to talk about, we'll have time after that to do so. So if you all are ready, then I can go ahead and get started with opening remarks for the first 10-minute segment. Sound okay? Okay, great. So for this first section, it's the 10-minute presentation. You've been called back by the company that you gave your full presentation to yesterday for a second visit, so congratulations. They have asked you to speak only today about the ethical aspects of their problem, and to explain why your solution successfully handles those ethical issues. You will have 10 minutes. There will be no Q&A. You cannot use slides or video. And you probably don't want to have more than 2 or 3 members of your team do this part. So with that, I will hand it over for your 10 minutes.
When do you plan on starting your timer? I'll start then.
Ready, set, go.
Greetings, CCRC board members. Thank you for calling us back, the Southern Postsecondary Research Board. We are happy to be here today, and we are glad to elaborate on the ethical concerns we previously presented on. In order to explain the ethical position further, I'm going to lead in with a real-life example. My sister, who's 5 years older than me, has always struggled with school and required developmental education courses upon entering our local community college, AVC. Given the poverty-stricken school district we grew up in, combined with her learning disability, my sister needed multiple levels of developmental education courses. However, she was unable to receive this because she had to use the co-requisite model, a model that you extensively advocate for in your research. My sister was not starting at a college readiness level, nor was she starting at a 10th grade level. She was starting at a 5th grade level. She had a lot of catching up to do and was not ready to complete college level coursework. I don't think her lack of preparation was her fault. If it was the case that my sister's story is unique, then it might be easy to dismiss her as an outlier and not raise red flags. However, her story is not unique. In fact, 58% of students who are in developmental education courses are just like my sister. Let me reiterate that. Over half of the students who enter community college are deemed not college ready. In most states, when students enter their developmental courses, they are required to be taking college level coursework in conjunction with a developmental education support course. This structure is what we mean by the co-requisite model. And this model seems to work for some traditional college students, but this model certainly does not work for all traditional college students, and this model is not working for our non-traditional students. As noted earlier, over half of the students you are committed to helping by doing research on education do not fall into the traditional category. To be clear, your current research practices do not include research on this 58% of the developmental education student population. Additionally, you continuously produce recommendations for practice, but you do not engage in peer review, a practice we participate in to ensure that quality and ethical research is being disseminated. By not engaging in peer review and by not accurately representing the population you are intending to serve with your current research, you, the CCRC, are acting unethically. We see that your hearts are in the right spot and you have great intentions, as displayed by your mission statement, which states, quote, "Our mission is to conduct research that helps these institutions strengthen opportunities and improve outcomes for their students, particularly those from underserved populations," end quote. This is an admirable mission statement. During our analysis of your research practice, though, we found that this mission statement is not being upheld in practice. Our students are actively being harmed by your current research recommendations, and unfortunately, your good intentions do not outweigh the harm being done. But we have every confidence that you could adjust your practices to eliminate the harm you are causing and help all students who enter the college system be successful. Jonathan will now explain more on the harms that are being done and explain some ways that we can help mitigate this.
Thank you, Shanice. So I'll get into discussing the harms that are being done, as there are several. But first, I think it's important to highlight why you have an ethical responsibility in this situation. So when you're working within the realm of education research, it's imperative to think about the common good of all persons. So philosophical thinkers have explained time and time again that in order to act ethically, a person has to consider the ways in which our actions affect others, and we ought to work towards a community that focuses on the good of all members, also known as the common good. And this is a very important framework to follow because it serves as a reminder that while outliers exist, we need to work on solutions that help all students, particularly those that are more seriously disenfranchised than others, which would include the 58% of non-traditional students that are in developmental education, as well as any other outliers that are in that community. In evaluating the ethical practices of your research, we've looked to see if your research was inclusive of all students, and it was discovered that it's not. You're actually leaving out that 58% of non-traditional students that are in developmental education. The harms being done to these students are fairly extensive. Um, so let me remind you that the students in developmental education are the intended beneficiary of your research. The Department of Education and other federal entities have given you grant funding to research ways to help developmental education students improve their outlook in their college success, but you've not done your due diligence with this research because you're not using peer review. You're using your non-peer reviewed working documents as 80% of your references in your developmental education publications. You've also have other poor research habits, which include using small sample sizes, selection bias for your sample of students. You're also using a metric of student success that does not fall in line with the traditional measure that education research uses. So instead of going by if a student persists to a college degree, you're actually using whether or not they pass their first college level course. And that has done a tremendous amount of skewing for your research. And all of this, by the way, has been outlined in a new Senate report from the state of Illinois. They just published this a few months ago, and they've actually blamed you at the CCRC for all these harms being done to their students because they actually followed your recommendations and required co-requisite support for their developmental education students. And also, in fact, 43 other states have adopted your recommendations for co-requisite support. So this is spread pretty far across the nation. And due to your poor research habits and the way that your recommendations have spread across the country, you're not contributing to the common good for developmental education students in many, many states now. And they're also having to pay double the course fees for their courses because co-requisite model courses require 2 instructors that they have to pay for. And other students do not have to do this. And 76% of the students in developmental education actually come from below the poverty line, and they simply can't afford to take these classes that your recommendations are based on, in large part because they're incurring an amount of student debt that their peers don't have to. In your mission statement, you say that you want to create opportunities for underserved populations of students so that they can succeed, but that's not the case here. What's actually happening is you're disenfranchising that populations of students even further. And it's actually just irresponsible for your organization to present your research as actionable knowledge, which is another value from your mission statement. It should not be the case that actionable knowledge comes from non-peer-reviewed research. You should not be encouraging states to adopt your recommendations because of this poor standard of research that you have. And because you keep claiming that this is actionable knowledge, 43 states have implemented your recommendations, and you've actually really harmed your chances of serving the common good at all for students in those states who, again, are the intended beneficiary of your research. Now for the solution. You state that you value collaboration, and yet in your 14-year history of doing developmental education research, you've not partnered once with any research organization from the field of developmental education or any faculty or staff members that deliver developmental education instruction. If you had done this initially, you would have had a better sense of the demographics of developmental education students. you would have known that the majority of developmental education students come from under the poverty line and are also non-traditional students. And you also would have had guidance that the co-requisite model isn't new. It's been implemented in many forms since the 70s and is continuously cut back and done away with because it's overly expensive and isn't actually a successful model at all. It doesn't do much for students. And therefore, we suggest that you collaborate with the Charles A. Dana Center and the National Center for Developmental Education. Between the two of them, they have about 70 years of experience in combined research in the field of developmental education. And not only do they bring an enormous amount of grant funding to conduct further research, but they also bring the reputations of integrity and the backing of the education research community. So this partnership can go a long way for ensuring that your future work is diligent enough and has the best practices so that you can actually say this is actionable knowledge that you should model policies after. So we encourage you to reevaluate your research practices and to utilize the available partnerships that are available to you in order to better serve our students. Doing so will allow the 58% of students in developmental education who are similar to Shanice's sisters to actually have more equitable opportunities for education. Thank you very much.
So in terms of feedback on this first section, let's go through some of that before we hop into the 92nd section. Really passionate about your topic, obviously, that came through, which is really important. Love the example that you started with, talking about your sister and pointing out that this is not just one data point, but your sister actually happens to be representative of like half the population that's relevant here. So that was very nicely done. And then the way that at the very end of the presentation, you looped back around to that example again, that was also very nicely done. Very well researched, that came through, and it's just clear that you are very bought into this. If I've hired you as a consultant to advise me on this, it's clear that you did your homework and that you're coming to the table with very well thought out plans. In terms of how to deliver the message, I think you could do some reframing to have a better shot at getting your way. So if you're going to walk into this organization who's been around for a while and my bread and butter is doing this kind of research, and you're going to point your finger at me and say that my whole research model is flawed and it's wrong, I felt very much on the defensive. And then it makes it hard for me to be open and listen to what you have to say, because in my head I'm thinking, but no, they don't understand and they're wrong. So, you know, there were a lot of criticisms about my my organization's research model. You know, that all the research, which is my expertise after all, that I'm not even using representative populations, I'm not engaging in peer review, especially kind of jolting were accusations that I'm acting unethically. And that I have poor research habits. So those are like very strong positions to come in and take, very aggressive, right? And adversarial. And I'm not sure that you really want to take an adversarial position in a situation like this. They're paying you. You were hired as a consultant to do some work and give them a recommendation. So I think you want to come across as very collaborative, not adversarial. In the middle there, you did some homage to, look, this organization, your heart is in the right place, you have a great mission. I think that's the part that you want to latch onto. So after the example about your sister, maybe you start with, this organization is really well intended, the mission is terrific. And then instead of saying everything that the organization is doing wrong, you still have to interject that, but you maybe find another way to do it and say, look, we did some research and we uncovered some things that if other people looked, you know, we're a little bit worried about the reputation here, because people could potentially say that, you know, the peer review isn't quite right or the sample size isn't quite right. And so, you know, maybe we want to use a model that can withstand better scrutiny. And the scrutiny is going to be coming, we're afraid, because 40 other states have adopted the model. And so, you know, we're trying to look around the corner for you and predict what the challenges are that your organization might face. So not, you know, accusing me directly of doing things wrong, but gee, your reputation, we see a risk out there on the horizon, and let us help you address that. You know, I'm not the one accusing you of being terrible, but somebody else might, and we wouldn't want that to happen, right? So it's just like a different way to frame your message so that you can win them over and get them to do what you want them to do ultimately. And then the only other piece on that substantively was just like probably 80% of the presentation, I think about 8 or 9 minutes worth, was about everything that the organization was doing wrong. And like 1 or 2 minutes was focused on what the solution was. And you probably want to flip that and talk more about what's the, well, maybe not quite flip it, because in this competition, you are asked to be clear about what the ethical problem is. So that's, I think that's unfair feedback for me to give, but maybe less time focused on the problem and a little bit more time focused on what the solution is, I think would be helpful. And also will naturally lead to a result where you're focused on more of the positive. So that's the feedback, and it's mostly, like I say, kind of on the substance and how you structure it. But the delivery, like I said, was really nice. Again, your passion comes through. You're well researched. All of that was very, very good.